Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma fleur, sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, qu'il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte.
The Russians also knew about what General Flynn had done, and the Russians also knew that General Flynn had misled the vice president and others. And that created a compromise situation, a situation where the national security advisor essentially could be blackmailed by the Russians.
All these months later, that sure gets your attention. That was the warning that former acting Attorney General Sally Yates delivered to the White House less than a week into the administration. But Michael Flynn then stayed on the job for 18 more days. It wasn't until the Washington Post made public Flynn had discussed sanctions with the Russian ambassador and lied about it that Flynn was fired. And in many ways, that is what led us to where we are right now today. With us now, one of the reporters who broke that story, Greg Miller, Pulitzer Prize-winning national security correspondent for the Washington Post. He's a man who quite literally wrote the book on this subject. Greg Miller is the author of The Apprentice, Trump, Russia, and the Subversion of American Democracy. Greg, I want to quote your own work to you, which I know you won't object to bring us back to this period of time. From your book, Flynn moved through inauguration weekend with oblivious elation. 2 days later, McCabe, Comey's deputy, called Flynn at the White House. McCabe said the Bureau needed to speak with him, proposed sending a pair of agents over, and asked whether Flynn wished to have an attorney present. Flynn knew this was about Kislyak and must have assumed the Bureau had a transcript, but the retired general also had a misplaced confidence in his ability, whether in combat zones or in Washington, to make his way through perilous situations. No, Flynn said about needing a lawyer. Send them over. I want to show you what General Barry McCaffrey tweeted today about his guess as to where this hubris from Flynn came from. There it is. He totally went off the rails. His fury at being fired by the Obama team, target fixation, only a military guy can come up with, target fixation on terror threat, too much time in the dark world, a superb combat intel officer. Greg, is that about as good an explanation for the period of hubris that you uncovered?
It's true. It is. It's a perfect summation. And I think it's why I look at Flynn as one of the few figures in this sordid Russian drama who is, you can sort of see as having fallen from some grace. I mean, this is not a story in which we have a lot of key players who are exactly symbols of patriotic rectitude. But Flynn is a guy who rose through the ranks in the U.S. military to become a 3-star, multiple tours, Iraq and Afghanistan, critical contributions to those conflicts in the aftermath of 9/11, and then did an astonishing turn even to many of his closest associates and friends after leaving government, after retirement. Really, I think, became bitter at how he was sort of shown the door by the Obama administration at the end of his career, and turned on the Obama team, Clinton, and of course Flynn goes on to lead those lock her up chants notoriously at the Republican National Convention. He goes to Moscow, appears alongside Vladimir Putin at an event staged by the Russian propaganda channel RT, and, starts trying to scrape together money from dubious sources, including getting himself involved in taking payments from Turkey that now appear to be another target of a federal investigation.
So the only time Trump and Obama meet at the White House, maybe the last time they spoke before today's handshake, Obama warns Trump, don't hire this guy. What did Obama know?
Well, I think at that time, Obama didn't necessarily see Flynn as somebody who was going to be mixed up in this Russia investigation. He knew Flynn as somebody who hadn't done very well. I don't think anybody in the Obama team really took any pleasure in having to remove Flynn from his last job in government, which was as the director of the Defense Intelligence Agency. But there were lots of concerns about his ability to manage that big organization and how things were going. Why he was so fixated on things like Iran and trying to find links to Iran and in activities and terrorist networks that really most analysts didn't think were there. They just think that he wasn't suited for that job, and that he wasn't really suited for that kind of service in Washington. As good as he was as an intel officer in the military, in combat zones, in places like Baghdad and Afghanistan, it just didn't work very well when you tried to put him in a civilian environment like the DIA or perhaps a senior job at the White House.
Well, as your colleague David Ignatius has written today, it looks like he has come all the way through the looking glass and made this complete circle. And his column today complements your reporting. Our thanks to Greg Miller for returning to our broadcast. And again, to our audience, his book is The Apprentice, Trump, Russia, and the Subversion of American Democracy.
It is Thursday, 6 December of 2018, and you are in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. I am your chef de cuisine, Justice Putnam, and our daily special is Metro Shrimp and Grits Thursdays. It is a little bit of jambalaya, a little bit of spice in your life. Oh my. Hey, I did check into some of the funeral yesterday. And I was a bit concerned because when he was in the, at the viewing there in the rotunda, and he was all fidgeting, and, I was thinking they got to discipline that kid. He's like a 6-year-old, and he can't stand still. And he was still a 6-year-old. He had a hard time sitting. But I guess they told him, just don't do anything. And he took them at their word, and he didn't do anything. He just stood there. This is the great hero of the evangelicals. Well, the white evangelicals. Let's be clear. There's a big difference between white evangelicals and all the other evangelicals. It's very stark. Almost like black and white. But he is a hero of that subset of religious cults. I don't think that they taught him the Apostles' Creed in that religious-themed church that he went to. This guy has no idea how to act in public, and he's been in the public eye for so long. I mean, New York. Think of it. New York. Of course, New York hates him. Always has. No one there likes him. No one said, oh, yeah, we want this guy. Well, a few people. But they live in Jersey. And so he's at that funeral for the elder Bush. And who does the media go after? Hillary. Hillary apparently just hates Jimmy Carter, didn't talk to him at all. And, of course, she spent about, 45 minutes, well, not that long, but a considerable time chatting him up, while the church was being filled. People are filing into the church. She's talking to Jimmy Carter for quite a long time. But Tweety, she's just not engaging him at all. Well, Yeah, at that point, the mood had drastically changed. People were reminiscing about, the fallen warrior, the long time adversary on the other side, But an American still served his country with honor. Let's be clear. As a young kid, instead of going to Yale, he went off to the war. Youngest aviator in the Air Force ever. I'm sorry, the Navy. And then Donald Trump and the First Lady entered. Now, I don't know, Melania was following Donald Trump's lead in that. It was a bit perplexing. Now, I was looking up the liturgy of the Russian Orthodox Church, and they do have the Apostles' Creed in the Russian Orthodox Church. It's not something that's normally used, though, I will say, in either the Greek or Russian Orthodox. But it is there nonetheless. So she didn't follow along when everybody else was reciting the Apostles' Creed, as is the custom in that part of a funeral service. So I was, a little perplexed also why Trump didn't put his hand over his heart like everybody else did. A lot of people says because he doesn't have a heart. Well, that may be true in a figurative sense. I think that it wasn't so much that he didn't teach putting your hand over your heart at that solemn moment in the military-themed school that he went to. I don't think that that's the issue. I think that they didn't teach it in the American Civics crash course that the FSB gives to, assets, dupes, and idiots. And I got to tell you, Trump might fit all three of those categories. What's on the rest of the menu here today? Well, at the top, of course, that was a rundown of how Michael Flynn went from chanting "lock her up" at the Republican convention, Trump's convention, to flipping on Trump. So Robert Mueller would then recommend that he don't go to jail, that he serves no jail time. Well, in spite of all that, he is still a traitor. Let's be clear. A lot of military guys and intelligence guys are really upset about that. On the rest of the menu here in the Bistro Cafe, part of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Metro Shrimp and Grist Thursdays, by the way. My. Well, after being hammered by the British Parliament over user data, Facebook is really complaining about fake news now. Yeah, I actually heard a suggestion that maybe Facebook should be treated as a utility and maybe broken up. Or it should be treated as, it should be treated as a utility and broken up. Goodbye. 8 counter-protesters were stabbed at a neo-Nazi rally in Sacramento, California. Then police tried to charge them with assault. Yeah, I'd start checking out the QAnon patches on the cops and maybe some affiliations with neo-Nazis. I would. And a factually impaired Confederate memorial plaque in the Texas Capitol can be debunked in just mere minutes. So what's taking Texas so long to remove it? After the break, we then move to the chef's table, where the NYPD is a police force with a history of illegal surveillance. Now it has a fleet of drones. What could go wrong? And Canada arrested Huawei's global chief financial officer, who is now facing extradition to the United States on suspicion she violated U.S. trade sanctions against Iran. All that and more on West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit. bottom of our homepage at netrootsradio.com, you will notice to the rightish of the page the chat room link, monitored by Kelly Lincoln. And please do check out her shows on Saturdays. At the Table with Kelly Lincoln begins at 3 p.m. on the West Coast. That would be 6 p.m. East. Later on, a few hours later, she teams up with Ricky May for the Round Table Roundhouse Power Hour. And that begins at 9 p.m. on the West Coast. Of course, midnight on the East Coast. And a Power Hour is packed in that hour of power. So check it out. Please now take a look to the leftish of our homepage, at the bottom of our homepage, at netrootsradio.com. You will notice the contribute button. And all kidding aside, if you could become a Patreon of Netroots Radio, you will help keep Resistance Radio beaming 24/7, and I got to tell you, 365. We are unable to do this without you, and even a small recurring donation, buy us a coffee once a month. If you could afford that, that would be something that we can stretch and really put to use, and we do, and because we are unable to do this without you, and thank you for your generosity. Follow Netroots Radio on Twitter at Netroots Radio. Tom takes care of that platform, and thank you, Tom, for taking care of that platform. You can check us out on Facebook, but if you haven't already felt the animosity, we don't really care too much for Zuckerberg and his, what do you call it, platform? But we're there. So if you feel brave enough, go ahead. We're not recommending it, but we are there. You can follow me on Twitter at Justice Putnam. I post a show notes and links diary on Daily Codes about 10 minutes before showtime, a very integral part of this whole virtual salon here at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. So do check that out. And you can follow the show on Twitter at Cookbook West. We're over on Facebook, of course, and we're on Tumblr too, but I hardly ever go to Tumblr. They're taking smut off of Tumblr. Probably the reason I don't go to Tumblr too much is because it was so smutty. And you can pick up podcasts of the show by way of Spreaker, Stitcher, TuneIn, iHeart, iTunes, YouTube, etc., etc., etc. Frank Dale of Think Progress brings us this first offering here at the Chef's Table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Metro Shrimp and Grits Thursdays. How much do we hate Mark Zuckerberg? Let us count the ways. In this reporter's opinion, of course. Well, though Congress seems hesitant to impose serious regulations on Facebook, even after the platform has been cited as a primary motivator for the rise of autocrats across the globe, and criticized for allowing Cambridge Analytica to harvest user data in service of Donald Trump's improbable presidential campaign, European governments have proven to be less favorably inclined toward Mark Zuckerberg's company. The latest example of European skepticism toward the social media giant occurred yesterday when a British parliamentary committee released documents showing how Facebook made, quote, agreements with select companies to allow them access to unique user data, end quote. Now, according to the New York Times, Adam Satiriano, Zuckerberg's company also discussed shutting off access to companies it viewed as competitors. Well, that's not nice. That's supposed to be against the rules, especially in Europe. The release of these internal documents, which were obtained as part of a lawsuit, were not well received by Facebook. I don't think so, especially since it turns out that the board agreed with Sandberg and said, yeah, let's go after that Jew Soros and use him like Goldstein in 1984. A company spokesperson claimed the revelations were, quote, only part of the story and are presented in a way that is very misleading without additional context. Yeah, I know, it's like Sandberg getting the okay from the board to use George Soros as the Jewish boogeyman who's criticizing the great upstanding stalwart of civic duty, Facebook. Now, the irony of Facebook's concerns about alleged misleading reports that lack additional context are likely not lost on anyone who remembers the 2016 U.S. presidential race, where the social media platform became a febrile hive of fake news stories and conspiracy theories that were seen by hundreds of millions of voters. Critics have alleged that impact of Facebook's fake news amplification was crucial to Trump's upset win, which occurred by a margin of around 75,000 votes in 3 states. Now, let's not forget that Facebook also offered this great service where they had several representatives right there in the room, in the data room, and pushing out the fake news and tracking it and getting the analytics and figuring out who was getting more riled up by the fake news and how they could use that to go after individuals in these 3 states in particular. And Facebook was right there helping. No other campaign got that. Despite initially downplaying the impact that his platform had on the 2016 presidential race, Mark Zuckerberg eventually changed his tune and said the company would renew its commitment to prioritizing high-quality news. In other words, they got caught, and they have to figure a way of, making the propaganda a little bit more nuanced, like everybody does. Over 120 million Facebook users, about half of all eligible U.S. voters on the platform, were unwittingly exposed to Russian propaganda during the 2016 campaign, as a February indictment of Russian agents by Special Counsel Robert Mueller's investigation of election interference noted. In addition, the social media giant has faced a series of embarrassing revelations regarding what it apparently knew about abuses of data, like the one that allowed Facebook profiles of more than 50 million users to be collected without their knowledge during Trump's 2016 campaign. Now, the combination of these incidents, coupled with a recent series of hacks that impacted tens of millions of Facebook users, led the company suffering the biggest stock sell-off in history. And why is Sheryl Sandberg selling 56,000 shares twice a day, and has been for the last 2 weeks? Zuckerberg and Facebook COO, Chief Operating Officer. She's a coup. Sheryl Sandberg have faced criticism after it was revealed the company hired a PR firm with close ties to Republicans that tried to blame protests against the social media giant on George Soros. Studies have shown that Trump supporters are heavy consumers of fake news, with most of the content being accessed via Facebook. Levin of the UK Guardian brings us this next offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Now, it has been revealed by the Guardian that California has not prosecuted anyone for these stabbings of these 8 counter-protesters. But the cops are seeking hundreds of charges against those 8 counter-protesters and hundreds of others. That's nice. Like I said, maybe we ought to start checking for some neo-Nazi tattoos. They have them. California law enforcement pursued criminal charges against 8 anti-fascist activists who were stabbed or beaten at a neo-Nazi rally, while failing to prosecute anyone for the knife attacks against them, according to police records reviewed by The Guardian. In addition to the decision not to charge white supremacists or others for stabbings at a far-right rally that left people with critical wounds, police also investigated 100 anti-fascist counter-protesters, recommending more than 500 total criminal charges against them, according to court filings from civil rights attorneys. Meanwhile, 4 men investigated on the neo-Nazi side of a June 2016 brawl at the state capitol. Police recommended only 5 mostly minor charges, none related to the stabbings. Lawyers produced new records this week as prosecutors in Sacramento prepared for a hearing in their long-running case against 3 anti-fascist counter-protesters who had been charged with rioting and assault. They shouldn't have got in the way of those knives. The knives had the right of way. For 2 of the counter-protesters facing potential prison time, law enforcement officers surveilled their social media activity and cited their left-wing politics and affiliation with Chicano and indigenous rights groups as evidence against them, the police reports revealed. None of the defendants heading toward trial were accused of the stabbings of anti-fascists. The documents have raised fresh questions about California police agencies' handling of right-wing violence and extremism, renewing accusations that law enforcement officials have shielded neo-Nazis from persecution while aggressively pursuing demonstrators with left-wing and anti-racist political views. Now, prosecutors have in the past vehemently denied that the investigation was biased and have said in filings that stabbing victims have not been cooperative. Well, I don't know. Maybe they can't talk because every time they do, their stomach muscles contract and it hurts. The Guardian previously interviewed 2 victims who were injured, then pursued by police. Cedric O'Bannon, a black journalist and stabbing victim, who ultimately was not charged, and Yvette Falarca, a well-known Berkeley activist whose case is moving forward on Thursday. Previous records, that's today, previous records also revealed that police had worked with the neo-Nazi groups to target the anti-racist activists. See? The records disclosed this week provide new details about 6 other stabbing and beating victims who were treated as suspects by police after the rally in Sacramento, which was organized by a neo-Nazi group called the Traditional Worker Party and affiliated with the California group, the Golden State Skinheads. Wow, they all drink together, the cops and the Golden State Skinheads. Lawyers analyzed more than 100 police reports, finding that the California Highway Patrol investigated 22 men affiliated with the neo-Nazis and recommended no charges for 17 of them, including some who police said were holding knives. For every anti-fascist protester police could identify, however, law enforcement pursued charges, including against people who were not accused of any violence and were simply attending the demonstration alongside other activists. Those activists were accused of unlawful assembly. Texas Tribune brings us this final offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, Metro, Shrimp and Grits Thursdays. State governments act quickly when it needs to. That's why you can tell when state officials don't think they need to act quickly. To be clear, this is not about faceless bureaucrats bogging things down. It's about elected state leaders with faces too politically cautious to make easy decisions. The governor, the attorney general, and presumptive speaker of the Texas House have lately turned their attention to a controversial and false plaque in the Texas Capitol that commemorates the Civil War, and it's been a long time coming. Credit State Representative Eric Johnson, a Democrat from Dallas, for raising a stink about this and for showing all of us just how slowly state government can move, even with presented what looks like a simple problem. Johnson pointed out well over a year ago that the memorial was an embarrassment, calling for the immediate removal of the plaque on August 17th of 2017 in a letter to Rod Welsh, executive director of the State Preservation Board. He copied Governor Greg Abbott, Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick, the Speaker Joe Strauss, and House Administrative Committee Chairman Charlie Green, and of course they're all repugs. A month later, Strauss agreed that it should come down, and nothing happened. The brass plate remained screwed to the wall in the Texas Capitol, and also screwed up in his version of Texas and American history. Its second paragraph, quote, "We therefore pledge ourselves to preserve pure ideals, to honor our veterans, to study and teach the truths of history, one of the most important of which is that the war between the states was not a rebellion, nor was its underlying cause to sustain slavery, and it always acts in a manner that will reflect honor upon our noble and patriotic ancestors." This is an impressive amount of malarkey packed inside those parentheses. Here's the truth of history that every Texas student should have learned in school. The state seceded from the Union. That is, it bailed out of the U.S. after adopting a declaration that causes a declaration of the causes which impel the state of Texas to secede from the federal union on February 2nd of 1861. The document referred to Texas's admission to the Union as a state just 16 years earlier, and it was pretty clear about where Texas thought the U.S. had run afoul of the original idea. They were upset because the government said that they could be a slaveholding state, and now they're saying, no, you can't. And Texas was promised to be a slaveholding state, and since they had already been a republic 16 years earlier, they already knew how to rule. So this plaque is gaslighting people, because the fact that the reason that Texas seceded from the Union in their own declaration of secession is because they wanted to have slaves. And I guess maybe Abbott and Patrick and the others are just fine with that, aren't they? Of course they are. Let's get to our break, and when we come back, we will go through weather from around the world and finish up the stories that we have curated for you today. You are listening to West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, and we will be right back.
You are listening to netrootsradio.com.
Please hang up and try again.
From a point at sea to the circles of your mind, a new force is at work for planetary transformation. New radio for a new Earth.
This is Take Two Movie Review. I'm Kim Lowe. This week, a ride like no other. Road trips and fish-out-of-water stories are par for the course in comedies. However, few dramas about racism incorporate such elements, much less provide as many laughs as the new movie Green Book. Set in 1962 and written and directed by Peter Farrelly from There's Something About Mary and Shallow Hal, the movie is based on the true story of Frank Anthony Vallelonga, a New York bouncer who lands a job chauffeuring African-American people pianist and composer Don Shirley on a tour through the Deep South, named for the popular guide for black travelers designating safe spaces for them to eat and stay in the Jim Crow era. Green Book tells the story of an unlikely friendship forged on the road. The loud, boorish Tony, played by Viggo Mortensen in a likely-to-be-nominated role, seems an unlikely choice for the job given the discomfort he displays in an early scene with two black repairmen in his apartment and the fact that he rarely ventures outside his Italian-American neighborhood. Likewise, the quiet, sophisticated Don, played by Oscar winner Mahershala Ali, seems like he'll be unable to tolerate Tony for a day, much less the weeks they're expected to spend on the road. However, as we soon learn, these characters are complex. Underneath Don's smooth exterior is a lonely man who isn't being true to himself. In one telling scene, he confesses feeling not black enough for the black world, yet unable to fit into the white world, which has afforded him his career and affluence. Likewise, Tony shows a level of tolerance and understanding after learning of an aspect of Don's character, which isn't expected given their initial meeting. While the ending of Green Book may be a tad sentimental, it is nonetheless an important film and one that will do well during award season. This has been Take Two Movie Review. I'm Kim Lowe. Catch up with us at take2moviereview.com and feed us back on our page on YouTube.
This is Scientific American's 60-Second Science. I'm Christopher Intagliata. If you go by ticket sales, the most popular film of all time is Gone with the Wind.
Frankly, my dear, I don't give a damn.
That is adjusting for inflation, by the way. But a movie's take at the box office is influenced by ad budgets, distribution, reviews, so box office may not be the best measure of a movie's cultural influence. To address that question, researchers gave movies the big data treatment by analyzing the complex network of connections among 47,000 movies on the Internet Movie Database, IMDb. The popular movie site tracks every time a film has been referenced or spoofed, featured or remade, all factors that indicate a movie's influence on subsequent films. And by analyzing those connections with a handful of algorithms, including Google's PageRank algorithm, the data scientists came up with a new number one. It's another 1939 flick by the same directors as Gone with the Wind, which has been spoofed more than 300 times and referenced by nearly 3,000 movies.
Toto?
It's The Wizard of Oz.
I have a feeling we're not in Kansas anymore.
Dorothy's Adventure was followed by the original Star Wars, the original Psycho, King Kong, and 2001: A Space Odyssey. The full ranking is in the journal Applied Network Science. The analysis does have limitations. It favors older films, and the underlying IMDb data have been shown to be biased towards Western movies. That is, the products of Western civilization, not shoot-'em-ups. As for Rhett Butler and Scarlett O'Hara, they still made the list, but down at number 19.
After all, tomorrow is another day.
For Scientific American's 60-Second Science, I'm Christopher Intagliata.
Hi, it's Tom. Could we humbly suggest your donation to netrootsradio.com? All we've got to run this 24-hour powerhouse of progressive resistance radio is what comes out of our own wallets. And you are our biggest donor. And it doesn't take much, $3, $5. Just go to the bottom of our netrootsradio.com page and hit our secure donate button. Heck, you can even make a recurring contribution. And you'll get a wondiferous pair of Netroots radio stickers for application to your backpack, your bumper sticker, or your banjo. Well, it's up to you which backpack you want to put it on. So donate what you'd like at the bottom of our netrootsradio.com's homepage. Because you are our biggest donor. Netrootsradio.com. Together, we are Resistance Radio.
It's time for Nicole Sandler's What's News from NicoleSandler.com and the Progressive Voices Network.
Congress is back at work dealing with a looming government shutdown after pausing on Wednesday for the state funeral of former President George H.W. Bush. Trump has verbally agreed to the short-term fix, but has threatened to shut the government down if a long-term spending package doesn't include $5 billion for a border wall. Democrats have said they're open to providing about $1.6 billion in funding for border security. If the continuing resolution passes on Thursday as expected, the White House and lawmakers will have 2 weeks to hash out their differences. The Senate Judiciary Committee canceled votes on nearly 24 judicial nominees for the second time in 2 weeks. Senate Republicans are at an impasse with Senator Jeff Flake, who has said he will block Trump's judicial nominees unless there is a vote on a bill to protect special counsel Robert Mueller. The Washington Post is reporting that representatives of the Saudi Arabian government reserved hundreds of rooms at the Trump International Hotel in Washington shortly after the 2016 election. MSNBC's Chris Hayes has the details.
New reporting that Saudi Arabia used U.S. military veterans to pump money into a Trump hotel. The Washington Post reports that lobbyists representing the Saudi government paid for an estimated 500 rooms at President Trump's D.C. hotel in the months after his election. The total bill for those trips, more than $270,000. According to the Post, the lobbyists rented the rooms ostensibly as part of a pressure campaign to overturn legislation opposed by the Saudi government. The lobbyists offered veterans a free trip to Washington if they then went to Capitol Hill to lobby against the law. Several veterans told the Post the trips featured fancy dinners in a Trump hotel dining room, an open bar that was frequently extended. One of the veterans said he was confused by the opulent nature of the trips until one of the organizers, who'd been drinking minibar champagne, mentioned a Saudi prince. I said, oh, we were just used to give Trump money.
Post-election problems have surfaced in a few states where Republicans are doing all they can to restrict the power of incoming Democrats who won control. In Wisconsin, state Democrats are considering legal action after the Republican-held legislature approved a series of measures that would restrict the power of incoming Democratic Governor Tony Evers and Attorney General-elect Josh Kaul. During the lame duck session, Republicans voted to reduce the number of early voting days, require legislative backing for certain decisions traditionally made by the governor and attorney general, and change the way the legislature could represent itself in court. State Democrats say the moves don't just undermine the incoming leaders, they undermine the entire electoral process. Michigan is following Wisconsin's lead. Senator Debbie Stabenow explains what's happening there.
This is a complete insult to the people of Michigan who voted a month ago for change. They voted for a Democratic governor and lieutenant governor, secretary of state, attorney general to make change happen. And so here's what the Republicans are doing to be able to protect power. First of all, they are voting at moving bills to take away campaign finance oversight from the secretary of state. Our Secretary of State, Jocelyn Benson, literally wrote the book on campaign finance and voter protection. People in Michigan voted for ballot proposals to add more opportunities to vote, to protect the vote. Secondly, for the Attorney General, they want to set up a way for the Republicans in the legislature to have equal standing on lawsuits. So when our Attorney General brings a lawsuit against polluters to protect our water or health care to protect pre-existing conditions, they want, as Republicans, to be able to have equal standing to be able to bring a taxpayer lawsuit on the other side.
Meanwhile, in North Carolina's 9th District, we're seeing evidence of actual election fraud. CNN has the story.
The voting irregularities in North Carolina's 9th District congressional race are part of a criminal investigation that began in January and include possible vote fraud that could have affected the outcomes in 3 elections. Among the allegations, more than 1,000 absentee ballots from likely Democratic voters were gathered and destroyed.
You're looking at several thousand or approximately 2,000 absentee ballot requests from this most recent election. Of about 40% of those, it appears at this point, may not have been returned.
Lauren Freeman, the district attorney for Wake County, North Carolina, was sent this letter back in January by the district attorney of Bladen County, asking for help to investigate voter fraud allegations and possible false statements to affect election outcomes allegedly perpetrated by McCrae Dallas, a political operative hired by Republican congressional candidate Mark Harris. Harris won the 9th District race in a squeaker. just 905 votes. But that vote count is now in doubt because the operation run by McCrae Dallas could have affected more than 1,000 of the votes.
The New York Times is reporting that global greenhouse gas emissions have been growing at an alarming rate in 2018, with scientists comparing the pace to a, quote, speeding freight train. 2 studies published Wednesday warn that the rapid increase of carbon dioxide emissions will likely bring about the most severe consequences of global warming sooner than expected. Scientists also said the unexpected surge in oil consumption, which has offset progress made by the sale of electric vehicles, is partly to blame. And that's a bit of what's news for now. I'm Nicole Sandler. If you appreciate these reports and the Nicole Sandler Show, I hope you'll consider making a contribution. My work is 100% listener supported, and I can't do it without your help. Find out more at NicoleSandler.com/donate.
From New York, I'm Luke Vargas with your World in 2 minutes. The Gulf state of Qatar announced this week it will leave the OPEC oil cartel in January, ending nearly 6 decades of membership and marking an end of an era for OPEC itself.
Qatar's departure is symbolically very important.
Bob McNally is president of the Rapidan Group and served as an energy advisor to President George W. Bush. Qatar, he says, produces less than 2% of OPEC's oil, but was one of the group's first members and helped bridge connections between OPEC and other countries.
By leaving amidst its dispute with Saudi Arabia and UAE, its broader dispute, it is another signpost that your grandfather and grandmother's OPEC of yore, meaning an Arab Gulf-driven organization led by Saudi Arabia, is yesterday.
The talk at this week's OPEC meetings in Vienna has been of OPEC Plus, an informal grouping of OPEC's core members and 10 additional countries. OPEC Plus has worked since 2017 to limit global oil production in the hopes of boosting demand and prices. But of all those OPEC Plus countries, Russia looms the largest.
The Russians are playing hardball. They don't want to have to cut production. They want to contribute the absolute minimum. And the Saudis have made it very clear for a few years now, if Russia doesn't go along, then we don't go along.
Russia did signal this week it will help control oil production through 2019. But global markets can swing a lot in a year, and Russian cooperation past then isn't certain.
Controlling supply of oil to keep oil prices stable has been vitally important, not only for the oil industry, but for economic and geopolitical stability as well. So it's a really important question for the world, whether we have anybody, any group out there able and willing to manage the supply of oil to keep prices stable.
With uncertainty swirling over the future of multilateral groups like NATO, the EU, or the G20, perhaps it's time to add OPEC to the list. Luke Vargas, The United Nations.
Thank you for accompanying us here to the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Metro Shrimp and Grits Thursdays, a little bit of jambalaya, a little bit of spice in your life. Let's begin weather from around the world along the banks of the Rogue River, in the Rogue River Valley of southern Oregon on the west coast of the continental United States of America, where it is currently 28 degrees Fahrenheit. What the hell? We're expected to be cooler than yesterday. It's supposed to be in the upper 40s instead of the mid-50s. And we didn't ever really get to the mid-50s yesterday. What are they talking about? Winds right now are light and variable out of the west. Will remain out of the west, light and variable for the next few days. And doesn't look like we have much in the way of wet weather in the offing, except Sunday and all next week. We are expected to have quite a bit of water from the sky finding its way here and dropping on us, and I'll take it. Upper elevations will be getting snow, of course, but where I'm at, I'm right a little bit lower than the freezing elevation, and we might get lucky that way. Pollen is still rated as none. Air quality index is 56 parts per million and moderate, not good for people with breathing conditions. Daytime UV index is low at 1. Barometric pressure is rising at 30.3 inches. Visibility is up to 10 miles. And relative humidity is 83%. Weather from around the world, and even here from the Rogue River Valley, is brought to you by people's personal weather stations that they purchased. These people planted these purchased personal weather stations somewhere on their property, and these people positively live around the world. London is 55 degrees and cloudy. Paris is 56 and cloudy with a weather advisory, and we are tuning to that right now, and it is a potential disruption due to wind. So heavy winds pushing through Paris right now. Rome is 57 degrees with a rain shower, and they are under also a weather advisory due to thunderstorms that will, not may, but will affect the electrical grid. So take care in Rome if you happen to be there. Kiev is 32 degrees and mostly cloudy. Kabul is 40 degrees with smoke. You know what that means. Hong Kong is 70 degrees and cloudy. Tokyo is 50 degrees and partly cloudy. Sydney, Australia is 67 and fair, and why wouldn't they be? San Francisco, California is partly cloudy with an active weather advisory, tuning into that as we speak, and it is a beach hazard. There is high surf right now. Rollers coming in 3 to 6 feet, and then they're going to have swells at 10 to 20 feet, which means the shore waves, especially on steep beaches, they're going to get what are known as sneaker waves. Do not turn your back on the ocean, please. And New York also has a weather advisory. They are 36, partly cloudy. Weather advisory is a small craft advisory, gusts out of the north at 35 degrees. Ouch. Well, take care, button up, stay warm, and that is weather from around the world, brought to you by people's personal weather stations that they purchased. These people planted these purchased personal weather stations somewhere on their property, and these people positively live around the world. Kay Wicker of Think Progress brings us this first amuse-bouche here at the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy Metro Shrimp and Grist Thursdays. The New York City Police Department announced on Tuesday that it will deploy a fleet that's containing 14 drones. The drones, as part of the Technical Assistance Response Unit, will be used during drug search rescue operations, monitoring traffic and pedestrians during events that draw crowds, for hazmat incidents in hostage situations, and, quote, other emergency situations. The fleet costs about $480,000, according to the New York Times. Drone technology will give our cops and their incident commanders an opportunity to see what they're getting into before they go into harm's way. For this reason alone, it would be negligent for us not to use this technology, Chief of Department Terrence A. Monahan said at a press conference. 29 officers will be trained to harass the public with their unmanned aerial vehicles, which the force swore in a statement will be used in good faith to harass mostly black and brown people, because they're mostly identifiable from the air, especially the way the analog is written. Let me be clear. NYPD drones will not be used for warrantless surveillance. We'll drone and hover right above you while we get that we'll get that warrant. The department also stressed the drones will not be used with or as a weapon, which means that they're practicing it right now to have a weapon. Okay. Of course, the NYPD has a history of coming under fire for illegally surveilling citizens. Of course, they're one of the, well, I wouldn't say one of the few, but they're one of the most efficient local police departments that have spy operations that go all over the United States. NYPD spies spying on, I don't know, anti-racists trying to protest the neo-Nazis' right to take over a state capitol mall. Now they can harass you with drones.
Je te donne ce mon amour pour la vie entière. La promesse de me trouver à tes genoux. Aussitôt que tu m'appelles, rester toujours fidèle. C'est tout, c'est tout. Je te donne tous mes printemps, mes étés de mer. Mes automnes, quand les feuilles tombent partout. Si ce n'est pas une bonne affaire, je te donne tous mes hivers, c'est tout.
Robert Fife and Stephen Chase of the Globe and Mail in Canada brings us this final offering here in the Bistro Cafe at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Canada has arrested the chief financial officer of China's Huawei Technologies, who now faces extradition to the U.S. on suspicion she violated U.S. trade sanctions against Iran. Meng Wanzhou, who is also the deputy chair of Huawei's board and the daughter of the company founder, was arrested on Saturday in Vancouver at the request of American law enforcement. She is sought for extradition by the United States, and a bail hearing has been set for Friday, Justice Department spokesman Ian McLeod said in a statement to the Globe and Mail yesterday. As there is a publication ban in effect, we cannot provide any further detail at this time, and the ban was sought by Ms. Meng. A Canadian law enforcement source with knowledge of the arrest said the U.S. is alleging Ms. Meng tried to evade the American embargo against Iran, but provided no further details. U.S. prosecutors in New York have been investigating whether Huawei violated U.S. sanctions in relation to Iran, which was first reported by the Wall Street Journal in April. Huawei said in a statement to the Globe that Ms. Meng faces unspecified charges in the Eastern District of New York and that she was arrested when she was transferring flights in Canada. The company has been provided with very little information regarding the charges and is not aware of any wrongdoing by Ms. Meng. The Chinese embassy in Ottawa strongly protested the arrest of Ms. Meng, saying she has not violated Canadian or U.S. law, and demanded her immediate release. Now, of course, the decision to detain such a high-profile Chinese citizen, and particularly one sought for extradition to the U.S., could hurt Canada-China relations. David Mulroney, a former Canadian ambassador to China, predicted the arrest of Ms. Meng will provoke a backlash in China and hurt Huawei's efforts to gain business in Western countries. This is a really big deal. Ms. Meng is by birth and position a member of China's corporate royalty. Now, Marco Rubio, a member of the U.S. Senate Intel Committee, lauded Canada for the arrest of Ms. Meng and once again urged Prime Minister Justin Trudeau to bar Huawei from 5G technology. And Rubio and Democratic Senator Mark Warner wrote to Trudeau in October to caution the failure to ban Huawei could interfere with intelligence sharing and impair cross-border cooperation in telecommunications. And there is some speculation that maybe Huawei and others might have been somewhat involved in influencing elections here in the United States. And now they want to have 5G technology here also. Maybe we should be a little cautious. All right, that brings us to the end of our broadcast period for the day, and you know that Netroots Radio is going to broadcast on. So stay tuned for that. We'll meet up tomorrow for Blue Moon Spirits Fridays. So do stay tuned to Netroots Radio all day and all night for all the breaking news as it breaks. And we'll meet up right here tomorrow in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théâtres, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma fleur sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte Goël. Je voudrais toujours te plaire dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je veux déjeuner par terre, comme au long de golfe clair, t'embrasser les yeux ouverts dans mon jardin d'hiver. Sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver.